Hey guys, welcome to Diet Psychology. Today we are going to break down the age-old issue of why we don't just do what we know we should do. If you've ever tried to lose weight or improve your health or just feel better with good nutrition and try to change or modify your health habits, you've probably said to yourself on more than one occasion, I know what to do, I'm just not doing it. I'm Richard Wolf, your host tonight. We're going to break this down into two compartments. First, we're going to address this whole issue of our environment. This is something that most people overlook. They don't recognize the powerful influence that your environment has on your eating habits. So we're going to break down how the environment affects our day-to-day food choices and our nutrition. And then we're going to talk about this issue of skill. Again, what most people overlook is the fact that eating sensibly in 2019 is an advanced skill. You can't just wake up on Monday morning and say, well, I'm going to eat better and spontaneously achieve that result in our modern culture. So this is actually a skill, and we're going to break that down, and we'll wrap up with a couple of action steps. If you say to yourself, you know what, I am committed to eating more sensibly, to eating better. What are the minimum prescription to-dos so that you can increase the probability that you'll be successful with a healthier diet and a better life? So let's start with number one. Number one is the environment. If we were to take a drive down Randall Road or any road in any town in America, what we would quickly notice is that we can get donuts and ice cream at the same drive-up window 24 hours a day. Baskin-Robbins and Dunkin' Donuts never close. They're open 365 days a year. If that wasn't enough for us, we can go across the street to Steak and Shake and get steak burgers 24 hours a day because they never close either. If you're still not full and you want just a little more to eat, you can go down a block to the Oberweis Premium Ice Cream drive-thru and get 500 calories a cup without ever stepping out of your car. So this is the first piece in what we call the environmental influence. If you ask nutrition professionals, if you ask health professionals, what do you recommend? Everyone knows, there's no disagreement here, wholesome foods and sensible combinations. Nobody is saying, hey, if I could just eat more Twinkies, I would be able to recapture that vitality I had 20 years ago. Nobody's saying this, but if you look at what people are doing, you'll see different health habits. So we know on one side of the coin, sensible combinations of wholesome foods. Everyone agrees, experts tell us to do this. And on the other side of the coin, in terms of what adults are actually doing, we see a diet rich in highly processed foods that are super high in calories and very low in nutrition. Scientists have coined the new term ultra-processed to really describe these foods that have had all their nutrients stripped, processed to death, bundled and promoted with billion-dollar marketing campaigns so that we're eating more and more and more of these foods and less of the wholesome, good-for-you foods. So this is the discrepancy. It's the environment that prevents us from executing on that recommendation of wholesome foods and sensible combinations. So we mentioned Randall Road. This is a vivid example we could see in any town in the United States. An abundance of calorie-dense foods available at the drop of a hat and for pennies on the dollar. What about processed foods in the supermarket? This was actually in the 90s, believe it or not. Frito-Lay, one of the best things they ever did to get Americans to eat more potato chips was simply increase the size of the bags. The CEO was very happy back in the 90s when they discovered if you make a 1 pound bag, people buy the 1 pound bag, they bring it home, they eat it, they go back to the store next week. They don't say to themselves, gee, I feel like I'm eating too many potato chips, I better throw this bag out. We basically eat to the bottom of the bag, go get the next 1 pound bag next week. So this was, of course, a step forward in sales for Frito-Lay as well as many other manufacturers throughout the world. And then if we look at Coca-Cola as a good example, They introduced their 6-ounce serving or 6-ounce bottle in the late 1800s. Then they evolved to the 12-ounce serving. In fact, when I was a kid growing up, it was a 16-ounce bottle. I remember thinking to myself, when I get to be an adult, someday I'm going to drink an entire bottle of Pepsi Cola, 16 ounces. It's just going to be great. We weren't allowed to have cola and soft drinks growing up, so that seemed like something to strive to do. But that seemed like a gargantuan amount of food in the 70s, 16 ounces of soft drinks. Today you've got the 20 ounce, the 24 ounce, you've got the big gulp at 32, and you've got the super big gulp at 48 ounces. You can basically take a bath in this thing, it's so big. So in the last 100 years in America, we've had over a 1,000% increase in the size, the serving size of soft drinks in the United States. So when we look at all of these factors, roads like Randall Road, companies like Frito-Lay increasing sizes, companies like Coca-Cola across the world making portions bigger and bigger and bigger. We bundle it on top of the fact that our diet is growing in our consumption of highly processed foods. Foods stripped of their nutrients, highly processed, bundled with billion-dollar marketing campaigns. It's easy to begin to realize that we're simply living our lives day to day in a world that doesn't work. In fact, if I were to quote Professor of Psychology, Dr. Kelly Brownell, he used to be at Yale University and now teaches at Duke. His soundbite is that the pressure to overeat is overwhelming. In fact, McDonald's ran an ad in the late 90s where the tagline was, "We have ways to make you eat." So the take-home message here is an important one. Understand that the retail food industry has a game plan. And their game plan, understandably, is to get you to eat more of their processed foods. And this is not a neutral environment we live in. If you just walk down the street, you're going to get inundated with messages and marketing campaigns to consume massive quantities of low nutrition foods that are available 24/7. So recognize, step back for a moment, recognize that even though you say to yourself, yes, I'd like to eat more sensibly, I'd like to get some vegetables in my diet, whatever the food is, overwhelmingly the messages, the marketing, the campaigns, the availability is to foods that are ultra processed. In fact, when I used to live up in Elgin and I would drive home at night, I didn't really notice any fruit stands on the side of the road on Randall Road. But you will notice about 75 billion fast food restaurants going from St. Charles to Elgin. In fact, if I just drive my car tonight, I live on the east side of St. Charles. If I just drive my car to the west side of town, I'll have about a dozen opportunities to consume donuts. Anyone who knows me knows I have a sweet tooth and I love donuts. One of my favorite foods. I typically don't eat them, but when I do eat them, I do enjoy them. If I drove my car from right now to the west side of St. Charles, I would have a Dunkin' Donuts right here on the east side of town next to the Toyota dealership. I'd be driving past 7-Eleven here. They have fresh donuts in their display case right next to the cash register. I go down a little bit and I'd see another Dunkin' Donuts on the other side of the road as well with a drive-through. Down a few steps further and I've got a independent donut shop on the south side of the road. If I get through town, I get to the other side of the river, I'll see another Dunkin' Donuts on the south side of the road. I'll also see a Beef Shack and a McDonald's and another Dunkin' Donuts at the corner of Randall and 64. So I can basically have a dozen opportunities to eat donuts, driving 5 minutes from the east side of St. Charles to the west side of St. Charles. So again, the take-home message is a critically important one. If you want to change your diet, you have to begin to manage your food environment. For the history of the world, humans have always consumed the food that is around us. We're simply eating the foods that are ultra-processed and not very healthy, and it's costing us on the health side of things. So number one, we need to learn to appreciate the effect that the environment has on our diet and then make changes as necessary. And I'll mention what those are in just a few seconds. But this is the first point to make. Our environment is what gets in the way of healthy eating. It's actually the problem, not the solution. Number two here is this whole issue of skill. Now, if you ask most people, what are they going to do, and men are even more guilty than women here, what are they going to do to eat more sensibly? They'll just tell you they're going to stop drinking beer, not eat pizza, live happily ever after. Well, that sounds good on paper, but in a real world, it takes more than just wanting to stop drinking beer and eating pizza on a daily basis. Now again, two of my favorite foods at the same time here. But when we look at the execution of actually eating healthier foods on a consistent basis, we want to understand that what most people do is they rely on self-control and willpower, and they don't recognize that this is actually a behavioral skill. If you said, I'm going to eat more vegetables, you can't just have a dream at night, wake up and say, well, I dreamed that I had broccoli last night and suddenly I feel good and I'm healthy. Of course, you have to go to the supermarket, walk past the aisle of processed food that you're going to go into to go get the vegetables, get back to the counter, look at the wall of candy staring you in the face as you're checking out, again, get into your car, drive past another half dozen fast food restaurants on the way home, cook the food, eat it, and repeat that again tomorrow, next week, etc. So the whole process of going to buy, preparing, packing it up, taking it with you, eating it, shopping again, that whole process is a skill that is very difficult to execute on given the unsupported environment we live in. I like frozen fruit. I use frozen unsweetened fruit in my fruit smoothies that I make. If you look at where the frozen fruit is in the supermarket, the aisle, the frozen section, is maybe 75 feet long. The frozen fruit takes about 6 inches of shelf space. Everything else from the right and left of frozen fruit is completely processed, ultra-processed food, just loaded and packed with calories. So even to go get some frozen fruit is a skill to get in there and escape the supermarket without being hammered to death with all sorts of other food options. So willpower doesn't work. Why can I say that? Because if it did work, everyone would have a perfect diet all the time. No one would ever eat anything that wasn't ideal for their health. You just turn on the willpower switch and everything would be great. We know that never happens. You have an ability to say no to food some of the time, but overwhelmingly when what's presented is processed food, highly available, inexpensive, billion-dollar marketing campaigns, it's super, super, super easy to choose the low nutrition, high calorie food. So managing this process is a skill, and as with any skill, you have to practice it. And you've got to practice it, and you've got to over-practice it to the point where it actually becomes what we call a non-cortically driven behavior. Remember when you were a kid and you were not excited about brushing your teeth, right? But your parents dragged you into the washroom and forced you to wash your teeth. This is a good example of learning a behavior. As a kid, you're not laying in bed saying to yourself, well, you know, I am really concerned about gingivitis when I get to be in my 30s. You're not saying that as a kid. All you know is you hate this process of brushing your teeth. You're not concerned about oral health 30 years later. But you get to the point where in the morning today as an adult, you wake up, you're in a coma, you walk into the washroom, you brush your teeth, you get dressed, you go to work. Someone at work says, hey, did you brush your teeth today? I think I did. I'm pretty sure I did. It now requires no cortical thought, no presence of mind. You don't have to get out of bed and say, now let's see, brush teeth, walk to the sink, brush right and left. No, you do this automatically without any conscious thought whatsoever. That's an example of a non-cortically driven behavior. It's overlearned because you did it as a kid over and over and over and over again to where you literally don't have to think about it. It happens by default. By the same token, this is how we develop skills with eating habits. If you practice these behaviors over and over and over, and you do the things that you have to do on a consistent basis, week and month and year after year, these do become non-cortically driven habits. You literally don't have to think about them. They're part of your routine They happen for the most part automatically, and that is our goal, to get to where healthy food choices are just part of what you do, just like brushing your teeth. You don't have to negotiate with yourself whether you brush your teeth, it just happens. Same thing, you shouldn't have to negotiate if you're gonna eat healthy, it should just happen. But it takes time and practice and repetition over weeks, months, years to develop those parts of your brain so that this response, this behavior is, again, very reflexive, very overlearned. So we know the environment impacts what we're eating. We know that it's a skill if we are going to eat differently than what the environment says, and it takes practice and it takes time. What can we do? What can we engage in? What steps can we engage in to begin to put things in our favor from a day-to-day standpoint? If we said, yes, I'm committed, I want to eat better, I want to eat healthy, how can I approach this? 3 basic fundamental action steps here I'm going to recommend to you from an environmental standpoint. Again, this is about managing your environment and developing skills with these habits over time by practicing them on a consistent basis, day after day, week after week, and so on. So step number 1 is to add those wholesome foods to your environment. Now, this sounds too simple, but it's a big step. Add those wholesome foods to your environment. So what's an example for me? My diet is rich in whole fruits and vegetables, so I like fresh, frozen, and canned vegetables. I eat them all. I've had all 3 of those today. I use them all as tools in my diet to get nutrients, to be full, and to crowd out less healthy foods. But when I go shopping, I've got a routine. I shop on Tuesdays and Saturdays. I know where in the store I'm going. I have a general zone for the types of fresh produce I'm going to get, the types of frozen produce I'm going to get, where I'm going for the canned produce, and so on. And so my shopping is very targeted to the foods I know I'm trying to introduce into my diet. I'm not spending time, I don't even walk down the cookie aisle. I don't even walk down the chip aisle unless for some reason I'm going to buy chips as a treat. But I'm not even going down those aisles. I'm going to the produce sections. I'm picking up other foods as well, but I'm not scanning the entire market. I'm not going up and down every aisle being riddled with decision anxiety over when I'm going to bring cookies home into my environment. So my routine is specific. I know the days I'm shopping. I know generally the time of day. I know what the foods are. I know the general areas of the store I'm going to, so that this literally becomes again, as we said, a non-cortically driven behavior. I don't have to overthink it. It is my routine. It's what I do. It's normal, but I've been doing this for decades, and this is my overall consistent additive behavior in my lifestyle. Now, yes, I'm eating other foods besides veggies and fruits, but those are just good examples of sort of markers in the diet, what I'm doing, how I'm getting those into my diet. I don't wander into the store mindlessly and wonder what I'm going to buy. I know exactly what I'm purchasing. Sometimes I have a list, sometimes I have it in my head, but I know what I'm going to buy. And that's the first step to eating a better diet, is identifying what are your healthy foods and then getting those into your environment. So I get them home, but then of course I'm eating at home, but I'm also out and about driving, I'm at work, so I have a food bag and I pack up my food bag each day. That goes with me as well, so I have some of these foods with me during the day. So you have to basically add these foods to the key environments. Of course, home, car, and work. Those are sort of the big ones, but you can really add them anywhere. So that's step 1. Add these foods to your diet. Develop a routine around shopping, buying, and then replacing them. I just find that twice a week is a necessary frequency to keep my fruit vegetable intake as high as I want it to be. So add these into your diet by adding them into your environment. And then number 2, equally important, is what are you not going to purchase? Again, I love baked goods. I like bread. I like donuts. I like cereal. All these things are tasty. But when I go to the supermarket, my commitment is I'm not coming home with bread. I'm not coming home with cereal. I'm certainly not coming home with donuts. That's very infrequent that I would purchase donuts. But these foods aren't coming into my home. Why is that? Because remember, if we bring those home, that creates that decision anxiety, that conflict over eat, don't eat, eat, don't eat, eat, don't eat. The only way to resolve that conflict is just say to yourself, eat the food and get on with your life. Quit worrying about it. We call that an avoidance response. That's also a learned behavior. People learn to avoid dealing with the issue by just eating the food and moving on. Of course, that puts you back to where you started. You're now eating too much bread, too much cereal, too many donuts, too many ding-dongs, whatever the food is. But you also have to decide, what are the foods I'm committed to not bringing into my home? And believe me, I know exactly what it is for me. I know what my food triggers are. I know the foods I love. And I know that if I'm going to buy those, it's going to be very infrequently, in limited quantities. It is not going to be a part of my routine. It's the only way I can get home and then eat those vegetables and fruits and other healthy foods by not having truckloads of bread, truckloads of cereal, donuts everywhere, et cetera, et cetera. So this is critically important. We call this subtracting foods from your environment. And believe me, it is easier to leave bread in the supermarket. If you're a bread fan, like most people I know, it's easier to leave it in the supermarket. That decision anxiety there in the supermarket is less intense. If you bring it home and say, I'm just gonna have one slice a day and put toast and peanut butter on it and et cetera, that is much more anxiety provoking than just leaving the bread in the supermarket. You'll win that battle. Bringing it home, if you're a bread lover, and trying to limit yourself to one slice a day, whatever it might be, for most people that really like bread, is a prescription for disaster. It's really a prescription for failure. So you have to decide, what are the foods to not bring into my home that don't go in my shopping cart, so I have a better chance at home to eat those healthy, good for you foods at the same time. We have a saying in our program. It goes something like this: cart, cabinet, calories in. If you put food into your shopping cart, it will end up in the cabinet at home. It will be calories into your body. It's not a question of will you eat it, it's just a question of when will you eat it. The example I like to make here is that if you told your coach that's working with you, hey coach, I'm not going to eat Oreo cookies this week, so I won't buy them. You've got your shopping cart in the supermarket, you see the Oreo cookies, and you say to yourself, you know what? I committed to my coach, I'm not eating these cookies. Let me purchase the cookies anyway, bring them home, just to make sure I don't eat them. That's how a lot of people handle this. They feel like, I need to build muscle. I need to build willpower. I need to have discipline. I need to be a better person. That stuff is all completely ineffective in a world where we're overwhelmed with highly processed, low-calorie foods. So it's all about cleaning up your environment, adding in the good for you, wholesome foods you need to eat more of to begin with, getting home, stocking the pantry, etc., and then knowing what are the foods I can't have. And even if you may buy them down the road, you've got to decrease these at some level. So for me, it just happens to be bread, it happens to be cereal, it happens to be donuts, all the foods in that category just can't come into the house on a regular basis if I'm going to have any chance of successfully eating a healthy diet. Now lastly, what about eating out? We live in a culture where we spend almost 50% of every food dollar eating in restaurants. So this is a real issue in our world. What I'm going to say here in very simple terms is that we're not suggesting that you never eat out, and that would be pretty unrealistic to do that. But you have to get more strategic about where you're going. If you eat out on a regular basis, one of the key things that will determine whether or not that becomes a nutritional disaster for you is, are you in restaurants that support your decisions? Can you get the healthy foods in those restaurants? If you're going to a Mexican restaurant, a lot of the Mexican restaurants really are tough to problem solve. Not that you can't do it, but they're tough to problem solve. But if you go somewhere where you can easily get lean protein, they're accommodating, they'll give you vegetables and whatever else you want, they'll modify dishes. Those are restaurants that will work with you and can give you a fighting chance to be successful if you're eating out on a regular basis. But in general, restaurants are a tough environment to manage. Eating out less is very constructive for most people. They do better when they eat out less. Their nutrition is better, their health is better, they're better managing their weight when they eat out less. But if you are eating out, you have to be a little bit strategic as to where I go. And we call this saying no before you get there. There may be some restaurants that you say, you know what, whether it's pizza or whatever it is, that's just off the radar most of the time. If I do that pizza joint or whatever it is, I'm going to do it very infrequently. It's not going to be a part of my routine. I'm going to have a handful of restaurants that I know I can get sensible foods, wholesome foods, sensible combinations when I'm eating in those restaurants. So that really is the ongoing issue of eating in restaurants, which is increasingly common here in our culture. So what have we said today? We've said the environment is by far the biggest factor influencing your eating. This has happened since the beginning of time. You need to really embrace this truth. The environment predicts what you're going to eat, whether you think it does or not. It is a skill to eat better. You have to practice specific behaviors repeatedly over days, months, and years to have these become reflexive, normal routines in your life. So it takes time and effort and consistency. And lastly, you've got to go get them, right? You got to buy these, and you got to buy them frequently. You got to know where to go in the store, where not to go in the store. You have to know what not to buy. That's a critical thing. Nothing worse than bringing home a big bag of chips if you love chips, if you're trying to eat less. That's a prescription for failure. So you've got to know what not to buy, and you also have to be more strategic choosing your restaurants, because those are areas that can easily become calorie bombs at the same time. You've got to be careful about where you're going and being strategic about having certain restaurants less often so you have a fighting chance to eat better on an ongoing basis. On that note, I'm going to thank you for watching tonight, and I look forward to seeing you next time.